Good evening. Okay, good evening, everyone. Can we start this review with a prayer? Rodante, Architect Rodante, to please lead the prayer, and then I go straight to the discussion on Clarenstein's 6 principles of Newtown. So, Architect Rodante, if you could lead the prayer. Ah. Hello. Okay. How about Jumel?
Wala lang po, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, Ria. Ria,
Okay.
Rina.
Okay, let us pray. Most gracious and Heavenly Father, the divine source of knowledge and connection, as we gather in this digital space to review the lessons that we have learned, we humbly seek your guidance and grace, and open our minds to the wisdom we seek, and grant us the clarity to understand. May the challenges we face in this review strengthen and resolve the deepen our learning. And Father God, we ask for your spirit of collaboration that we may learn from one another and build upon the knowledge we have gained. May we approach this review with hearts and minds ready to embrace new perspectives and insights. Guide our technology, Lord, that we may serve as well and allow for a seamless and productive session. May we find joy in the process of learning and emerge from this review with renewed understanding. We ask that, and we give thanks to you, Lord, for the opportunity to grow and the gift of knowledge that enriches in our lives. This we ask in the mighty name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thank you. So, Jen, do you mind sharing your screen so I can start with that? Um, so we have a new topic. It's Clarenstein. He had 6 principles of Newtown. So remember, we had the Garden Cities movement, and then we had Newtown. So this is particularly um applied in the US starting 1920. So Florenstein, he was a pioneering urban planner. He was also instrumental in the earliest regional planning efforts in the US during the 1920s. So his work emphasized creating well-planned, sustainable communities that met the needs of residents and industries while reducing inefficiencies. So you can see here there are 6 principles. So we start with plan simply but comprehensively. The core idea is to avoid overly complex designs while ensuring that all aspects of the community are accounted for. This principle underscores the importance of holistic and integrated planning that addresses all essential components such as housing, transportation, industry, and public spaces. Simplicity in design can lead to more efficient and cost-effective developments. The second principle is provide ample sites in the right places for community use. So this principle is characterized or explained that a well-designed town allocates space for essential community services such as schools, parks, healthcare facilities, and public services, among others. So these sites must be strategically placed for easy access to residents, ensuring that they are well distributed throughout the town to prevent overcrowding and overuse in any one area. So the intention is to create vibrant, and balanced communities where every function has its own designated space. The third principle is put factories and industrial buildings where they can be used without wasteful transportation of people and goods. So Stein stressed the need to minimize transportation costs by situating factories and industrial areas close to necessary resources, labor, and distribution networks. So by carefully positioning these facilities, towns could cut down on unnecessary commuting and transportation of goods, thus increasing efficiency and reducing environmental impact. Just a moment. Thank you. Thank you for waiting. I just got water and yeah, we can go to where am I? It's sana ba ako? Saan ako, Jen? Number 3. Number 3, ano?
Yes, ma'am. Number 3.
Okay. All right. Bigla akong ano eh, yeah, I had breathing, bigla akong hindi nakahinga sa okay. Thank you for waiting. Put factories and industrial buildings where they can be used without wasteful transportation of people and goods. Stein stressed the need to minimize transportation costs by situating factories and industrial areas close to necessary resources, labor, and distribution networks. So by carefully, I think I mentioned that by carefully positioning these facilities, towns could cut down on unnecessary commuting and transportation of goods, thus increasing efficiency and reducing environmental impact. So the next principle is cars must be parked and stored, not on the streets. So this principle promotes the idea of keeping streets clear and safe for pedestrians. It encourages the use of designated parking areas for cars rather than allowing vehicles to clutter streets, which can create congestion and reduce the aesthetic appeal of residential areas. So Stein's foresight on the use of dedicated parking facilities reflects a concern for urban mobility and safety, which remains relevant in modern cities. Now, the next one is bring private and public land into relationship. Stein believed in the integration of private and public land to foster a more harmonious and balanced urban environment. So by connecting these spaces, planners can ensure that private developments such as homes and businesses are well integrated with public amenities like parks and infrastructure. So this encourages a more collaborative use of space, enhancing the livability of towns. The next or the sixth principle is arrange for the occupancy of houses. The planning of residential spaces was a key focus for Stein. Housing should be thoughtfully arranged, ensuring sufficient space, privacy, and accessibility for residents. So well-planned housing developments contribute to the overall social and economic health of the town, creating a welcoming environment that supports growth and stability. I hope you understood the six principles that, if you try to look again one by one, they remain highly relevant in today's urban planning context. So his focus on creating simple yet comprehensive town plans that consider the needs of residents and industries alike can still be applied to modern challenges such as sustainability, urban mobility, and community integration. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, moment. Gawa na lang mga. So, yeah, in regional planning, several key principles are crucial for creating sustainable, efficient, and resilient regions. Um, we can go. Okay, first is design transportation corridors using hubs and spokes and consider major new infrastructure. Are you very familiar with hubs and spokes? So, this principle emphasizes the importance of organizing transport systems in a way that optimizes connectivity. So by using a hub and spoke model, um, major centers known as the hubs are connected to smaller towns or settlements known as the spokes. So it encourages the development of infrastructure that improves mobility and access across the region, facilitating the flow of people, goods, and services. So let's check that one about, I would like to deal more, I'd like to explain more on the hubs and spokes. It's actually a model. In fact, we can even apply this to waste management or circular economy and those that are, that could be, for example, it can describe also the organization of urban areas. We could also apply them to, yeah, transportation networks and economic relationships within a region. So this concept is based on the idea of a central hub, which is a core city or urban center connected to various outlying areas, meaning the spokes, okay, through transportation or communication networks. So, um, yeah, for example, in hubs and spokes model, the central hub um serves as the focal point, okay, of, for example, transportation routes. So it promotes efficiency or efficient connectivity between the core and surrounding regions, facilitating trade, movement of people, goods, and services. So yeah, you can kind of relate it to the like a bicycle. So the center is the hub, this the hub, and then yung ano niya, those that are connected with the center of the bicycle uh wheel would be the spokes that connect, or um that integrates them with the hub at the center. So if you can imagine also that you are connecting outlying areas, that the smaller towns, to a central hub. So it also the hub typically represents a major economic center, and then yeah, so it provides employment opportunities, services, and infrastructure, while the spokes may serve as residential, agricultural or industrial zones. So what else should I say about the hubs and spokes? Because it's a technical term actually. Like what we have, like dormitory town, and then we have the growth pole, we have the nodes. So it's yeah, typically the hubs and spoke refers to the smaller towns being the spokes and linked to a major economic center, which is the hub. So okay, we can go to the next one, which is some settlements. It says here some settlements in the region may be administrative in nature, while others are based upon manufacturing or transport. So what do we mean by this principle? Um, it means that regional planning must recognize the diversity of functions within different settlements. So administrative centers might host government services and offices, while other areas may be industrial or transportation hubs. Tailoring policies to support the specific roles of each settlement ensures efficient land use and economic development across the region. So, okay. So that's yeah, it's considering diversity in terms of land use, okay, and settlements. So let's see number 3, set regional level policy, which encourages a mix of housing values and communities. Ensuring that the region has a variety of housing options uh, is is essential for creating inclusive communities. So policies should promote a mix of affordable and market rate housing to cater to different socioeconomic groups. So this approach prevents socioeconomic segregation and fosters diverse, cohesive communities where people of different backgrounds can live and work together. We go to the next one, resist development in floodplains or along earthquake faults. So these are the these principles, it guides urban and regional planners to balance the needs of the community, economy, and environment. So that's why we need to do this one. We need to make breakdown. We need to have a breakdown of all these principles So, and I mentioned about we need to resist development in floodplains or along earthquake faults because it's one of the critical functions of regional planning is disaster risk reduction. So developing in hazard-prone areas such as floodplains or near earthquake faults put lives and property at risk. So instead, these areas can be used for parks, green spaces, or farmland to provide environmental and social benefits while keeping communities safe. Then the next one is designate greenbelt land or similar to resist settlement amalgamation and protect the environment. Green belts are designated open spaces surrounding urban areas that are protected from development. So they act as buffers, preventing urban sprawl and protecting ecosystems and farmland. By conserving greenbelt areas, regions can maintain a balance between development and environmental preservation, contributing to better air quality, biodiversity, and public recreation spaces. The next principle is consider designating essential nuisance land uses locations, including waste disposal. So what do we mean by this principle? Every region needs land for essential but often undesirable uses, such as waste disposal, sewage treatment, and heavy industry. So these nuisance land uses should be carefully planned and located away from residential or sensitive environmental areas. So proper zoning and regulation ensure that these necessary functions do not negatively impact the health and well-being of residents. So I hope you got this principle correctly. And then consider building codes. That's the last, I think, principle here. So consider building codes, zoning laws, and policies that encourage the best use of the land. So building codes, and zoning laws, they're fundamental tools in regional planning. They help regulate land use, ensuring that construction is safe and that different activities are appropriately located. So effective zoning policies promote orderly development, protect property values, and encourage sustainable land use practices. So we can go to the next one, regional planning as networking. So is it correct? So um it's also, I think, we've done related topics before this one, which is the region as a like virtual region. So we can actually, this is yeah, to explain this paradigm of regional planning as networking. Uh yeah, these are the characteristics. So let's do that. This emerged in 1990s. So the key points would include regional assets as, okay, the real assets, it says here, of a region are the actors within the region, the resources, and the specific regional culture of cooperation, communication, and competition. So, these actors have resources, right? Financial, intellectual, and social. So, and their interactions create a regional culture. So the success of regional planning depends on promoting cooperation, communication, and competition among these actors to leverage their resources. So that's the, okay, actually the concept of assets, um, yeah, is not, it's not just physical infrastructure or land, but also the actors within the region. Okay, and the actors are involved in business, they are public authorities, and also the community. So that's why I mentioned these actors have resources, either financial, intellectual, and social. So second is traditional regional planning. So you can see here the core of spatial planning is no longer the elaboration of plan and programs. Regional development must promote the realization of planning goals by supporting the cooperation between different stakeholders, both from public administration and the private sector. This shift actually recognizes that regional planning requires the collective efforts of different actors. Therefore, the role of planners is to foster an environment where collaboration can thrive to realize planning goals efficiently. So when you say from elaborating plans to promoting cooperation, so that's a shift that I was I just mentioned. Then third, planning and acting in networks is especially important at the regional level. So the idea of networking is central to this approach. In regional planning, no actor or institution operates in isolation. So instead, regional actors form a network, whether formal or informal, of independent relationships or interdependent relationships. So planning and development now take place through network decision making, where information, ideas, and resources flow between interconnected stakeholders. So what's the changing role of space and specialized knowledge, which you can see here on the fourth um okay, the fourth one. The fourth um yeah, characteristics or role. So yeah, it has the traditional understanding of space as a fixed geographical area is shifting. So it's another shift that we are talking here, aside from the elaborating plans to promoting cooperation. So changing role of space and specialized knowledge. So today, space is viewed more dynamically, and planners must have specialized knowledge beyond local or regional considerations. For instance, expertise in international marketing may be necessary for regions that are connected to global markets. This specialization allows regions to better understand and engage in broader economic systems and expanding their role and impact. So this networking model in regional planning moves away from top-down approaches and towards a more fluid, dynamic, and collaborative process. So it recognizes also that effective regional development relies on the capacity of actors within a network to work together, share resources, and continuously innovate. We can go to the next one. So the theories of regional planning, there are many there. So if you can count, there are 8. All right. So yeah, these are very important, and who knows, we don't know what would be asked during the 2025 board exams. So we might as well become serious about this one. No guarantee that it will be an objective type of questioning, or like what happened to 2024 exams, that Mostly it pertains to critical thinking, analytical thinking, that you when you simply memorize them, it would be very challenging. But when you understand clearly all these theories, then probably it could give you a better chance for 2025 board exams. So let's start with the growth pole theory. Because it's a French name, so if you try to research and find out or how we pronounce, you can you can I know you can always say Francois Peru, but it's supposed to be pronounced Hozua Pehu. All right, but I hope you can always pronounce it as you spell like Francois Peru, but Hozua Pehu in 1950, and this theory posits that economic growth does not occur uniformly across a region. Remember that. Instead, it starts in growth poles or centers where key industries or urban areas with significant economic activities, which then spread development to surrounding areas. So it originates at the center. It always starts at the center, which we call the growth pulse. So the theory focuses on stimulating growth in specific strategic areas to achieve a broader regional development. So that's growth ball theory by Swapehu. Then the growth center theory by Jacques Jacques Baudeville. So it's closely related to growth pole theory, but emphasizes the role of cities or urban centers as the drivers of regional development. These centers are seen as focal points where investment is concentrated, leading to a diffusion of economic benefits to adjacent rural areas through infrastructure development and industrial activity. Okay. Then we have theory of cumulative causation. Anyway, I will be explaining them generously on each of this one. And just to introduce on this particular theories, a theory of cumulative causation by Gunnar Myrdal in 1957. This theory explains that development is often self-reinforcing. Once a region starts to grow economically, positive feedback loops such as increased investment, higher wages, and better infrastructure fuel further development. So it's like how do you call that one? Like a chain reaction kind of thing. So, however, this theory also warns about regional imbalances, as growth in one region might come at the expense of stagnation in others. So, it it it's trying to say that regional imbalance is a natural thing as a um as a stage of growth in any region, but it might come at the expense of stagnation in others. So, industrial linkage model by Alan Richard Pred in 1977. This model focuses on the interconnectedness of industries within a region. So regional growth is driven by industries that develop strong linkages, either backward, meaning with suppliers, or forward with distributors or consumers. So these linkages stimulate further industrial development, innovation, and employment within the region. Then there's theory of uneven development, um, polarization and trickle-down effect by Albert Hirschman in 1958. So Hirschman explained that development tends to polarize in specific regions, leading to unequal growth. So it's similar with the theory of cumulative causation by Gunnar Myrdal. But this one is out by Albert Hirschman, that that this was the theory that explained the the common principle that the richer regions grow faster, attracting more resources, while the poorer regions may lag. So the poor becomes poorer and the rich becomes richer. So it is in this theory that you can find that. So the hope is that eventually the benefits of growth would trickle down to the less developed areas, but this process is not always automatic or guaranteed. Then hierarchical diffusion model is by Brian J. L. Berry. Uh, his model, Berry's model, explains that innovations and development spread through a hierarchical diffusion process where they're first adopted in larger urban areas, then gradually diffused to smaller cities and towns. So this process is shaped by the hierarchical structure of settlements where larger urban areas or urban centers tend to be more innovative and interconnected globally. We also have the core periphery model by John Friedman in 1978, where the model divides regions into core and periphery areas. The core, typically an urbanized and industrialized area, dominates economic, political, and cultural life, while the periphery consists of rural and less developed regions. So the core controls resources and power, leading to dependency in the periphery, which lags behind in development. And there's also the World Bank's model of regional planning. Yeah, I think this is the latest among all, but of course, because this was in 2009 and we expect more shifts already after almost 2 decades. So okay, so 1.5, probably 1.5 decades. So the World Bank's model emphasizes the importance of inclusive and sustainable regional development by focusing on enhancing regional integration, building resilient infrastructure, and ensuring equitable access to resources. This model advocates for reducing regional disparities by ensuring that economic growth benefits all parts of a country or region, not just its urban center. So we can now start going to it, going back to it one by one, so that you would be able to get more substantial explanation on each of the theories. Let's start um with Hoswa Pehu. Go to the next slide, please. And you can see we're putting face now. You can see his face of Hoswa Pehu. Then, what do we mean by I think I mentioned already about growth pole. So let's see. Maybe you can go back. Okay, can you advance it, Jen? Can you advance it? Okay. More? More? Okay. I'll call on Rodante. I hope you're there. Do you remember what I explained about growth pole by Pehu? Anything that you remember from not expecting a perfect answer? Anything that you remember? I know you're there. Hi. I'll go back to you later. I think maybe Christine Joy. Christine Joy, what do you remember by the growth pole theory?
Good evening, everyone. So, growth pole theory, uh, it starts from the center, then the development will have a ripple effect to the periphery, ma'am. That's all.
Yeah, that's correct. So I hope you can also explain to me like that kahit one liner it means that it gives me the confidence that you have understood my prior explanation because I'm now ready to put out more substantial explanation. Thanks, Christine Joy. So you can go back to the last slide. Okay. So um yeah, in discussing Josua Pehu's growth pole theory, it's essential to emphasize that economic growth does not occur uniformly across all regions. Rather, as mentioned by Christine Joy, yeah, that growth is concentrated at the center or in poles. Specific, so it means that specified or specific industries or areas that act as centers of growth. So um, these poles exert influence on their surrounding areas, as mentioned by Christine Joy, and promoting further development. But there's a terminology there that promoting further development through agglomeration effects. I'm going to ask you later about this again, about agglomeration. So Pehu argued that growth manifests in certain points or poles with varying intensities from which it spreads through various channels affecting the broader economy. So the key idea here is that these growth poles are not randomly scattered, but are spatial concentrations of economic activity typically driven by leading industries or firms with high economic propulsion. And that's why he said here, growth does not appear everywhere and all at once. It manifests itself in points or poles of growth with variable intensities. Okay, these are all keywords so that you will remember them during your board exam. It spreads by different channels with variable terminal effects for the economy as a whole. So growth again, growth pole in the second bullet, a spatial agglomeration of related industries which contains a growing number of propulsive firms which through their expansion induce growth in the surrounding hinterland. So what is a hinterland? Um, Edmond? Edmond? Architect Edmond. I hope I know you learned them in your architecture.
Good evening po.
Okay.
So hinterlands are areas that surrounds um a wide I mean a developed area, maybe a city or maybe a region that it's not yet fully developed. It's more on open
Mm-hmm.
spaces. It's more on green spaces, I think.
Okay.
Um, that serves as a buffer zone for that bigger city. So I think, if I'm not
Okay.
mistaken.
So, yeah, architect Edmund is correct. It's not yet developed. It's the surrounding area that we're talking here is not at the center. So, it's important that we know about this one, right? It's the opposite of the center, so it means that it's like a core periphery model. So the hinterland is the, you know, periphery. So it has a separate function, and so we can now conclude, or we can now, um, yeah, we can now come into, or we can now resolve that the hinterland is also called periphery. So it's usually more rural as mentioned by the architect, and or suburban also, okay, rural or suburban, and is dependent on the core city for higher order services. So when I think if you remember Walter Christoller of the central place theory, and his model revolved around, you know, the core and how it spreads outside, and how yeah, he related his model to having or containing higher order services and lower order. So you need to understand indeed how the dynamics of the periphery, so, or the hinterland that I've just mentioned. So okay, maybe we can go to no, wait. Still go. Okay, let me just mention about resources, our resource supply and economics. So, because below his photo, okay, or beside muna, yung photo muna itself. So there's photo there, and you can see the orange one. Is it orange or red? I'm not sure. I'm colorblind. So that's the center, right? So that's the center, and then the periphery, it goes outside. And if you try to look at it, so the hub and spoke there is like a bicycle, yeah, the bicycle wheel, right? Okay. So we can relate all these concepts here, and it says a growth pole, okay? The one at the below his photo, a growth pole is the economic space, okay? Economic space. May be an industry or cluster of firms, all right? While a growth center is a geographic space, is a specific city or central space or place. I hope you will remember this kasi we will always go back to this particular model or this theory of Josua Pehu about growth pole. So urban growth and expansion often lead to the urbanization of the hinterland. So in regional planning, managing this process is crucial to avoid unchecked urban sprawl and preserve the hinterlands, for example, agriculture, natural or rural character. So as planners aim to guide this growth through zoning policies, infrastructure investments, and land use controls that protect the hinterlands resources while allowing for managed development. But this is beside the point because we are just talking about the theory here. So I hope you understood hinterland as a critical component of regional planning, serving as the area that sustains the urban core with resources while relying on the core for services or and economic opportunities. So growth pole versus growth center, that growth center is a geographic space. Okay, identifying now by these definitions, we are identifying the key role of the core, the growth pole, and the growth center. Okay, that it identified the economic space referring to the industry or cluster of firms, while the growth center, we refer to the specific city or central place. I hope this is clear. And okay, so maybe we can go to the next one. Okay, next slide, right? It's still we are still on this model. No, probably that one kanina, and then yung propulsive firm earlier. Okay, yun, propulsive firm. Okay, because coming from the definition, we just captured that small definition there, but okay, propulsive firm means that who argued that growth, okay, manifests in certain points or poles with varying intensities, okay, from which it spreads through various channels affecting the broader economy. Probably you have this in mind earlier. So the key idea here is that these growth poles are not randomly scattered, but are spatial concentrations of economic activity and typically driven by leading industries or firms with high economic propulsion. So that's what we call the propulsive firm industry. So I'll be asking later what is propulsive firm, because there are also, how do we identify a propulsive firm? How do we characterize propulsive firm? So they should be large in size, they are fast growing, and they have strong linkages, and they are innovative. So I hope you also understand this one. Let's see. It says here, direct, okay, hang on. Propulsive firm. So I think I don't have, okay. All right, I don't have the key elements, okay, here, because I need to say about say something about spatial agglomeration here. So where should, okay, direct and indirect dominating influence. Characteristics of propulsive firms: large size, fast growth, strong linkages, innovative. Then under it, direct and indirect dominating influence over all other activities. So yeah, so what do we mean by that? Okay, that let's see. What do we mean by that? Direct and indirect dominating influence, right? So like when a growth pole consists of spatial concentration of these firms, so their presence leads to clustering of activities that further boost productivity, infrastructure development, and regional. So it's not arbitrary, it says here. And as propulsive firms grow, their influence, okay, or dominance expands beyond their immediate location. And how do they behave? They stimulate economic activities in the surrounding areas, so which we call the hinterland. And so this outward spread occurs as these firms require resources, labor, and services from neighboring regions. So that's the expansion of economic influence. Then, so while the growth pole refers to the economic activity and then its driving force, the firms, and the growth center refers to geographic location, a city or town, where development is focused. So both concepts are essential for understanding regional planning, as they address both the economic and spatial dimensions. So, and it says here, oligopolistic concentration of industry with price leadership and keen sense of anticipation in the moves of its own center as well as its related branches. So so when we say propulsive firms are often oligopolistic, meaning they operate in markets with limited competition, where a few large firms dominate the industry. So through price leadership and anticipating moves in the industry, these firms lead innovation and expansion, which influences other economic actors. So what else? Yeah, I'm looking at the characteristics. So lahat we're able to cover. So strong linkages in innovation because these firms tend to have strong forward and backward linkages with suppliers, distributors, and service providers. For example, an automotive plant that relies on local suppliers for parts can create a chain reaction of economic activity. So the innovative edge of these firms drives efficiency and progress in related industries. So maybe we can go to the next slide. Yeah, let's skip those in blue. Okay. Okay, that we can go to Jacques Baudeville. Jacques Baudeville. All right. Okay. So, it's actually the growth, it's still the growth center theory. So he expanded that one. He transformed Pehu's growth pole into a more geographically specific place. Whereas the growth pole could refer to any economic space, the growth center refers to a real geographic space within a region that's continuous and not specialized in a single sector. Okay, so while the growth pole speaks about homogeneous economy, this one is the opposite because it speaks about heterogeneity. This means we are looking at urban areas where a complex mix of industries promotes not only local but regional development. So there we go. The growth center as a geographic space is a propulsive urban center. It's the other one, the growth pole is propulsive firm or industry. This one, it's a propulsive urban center where economic activities are highly concentrated. So these activities induce growth, not just in the center, but in the surrounding hinterlands. What makes growth centers unique is that they generate a higher rate of population or employment growth than the region they are part of. Okay, so sounds familiar? Okay, this is due to the agglomeration of industries and services which fuels economic dynamism in and around the center. So regional growth centers as through the lens or of Vaudeville extends the idea to regional to by expanding industries and economic activities, which he said they're not just local but ripple through a broader zone of influence. And this zone of influence, according to Vaudeville, helps distribute economic growth and innovation across a region. So the goal is not just concentrated growth, but a spread effect. Okay, please remember, it's a spread effect that benefits the region as a whole. Then, we also have a regional growth center. It's grow as a growth inducement mechanisms. Okay, so growth inducement mechanisms under this, it says these growth centers trigger what we call growth inducement mechanisms, such as polarization. What's polarization anyway? So there are three concepts here under the mechanism. So how do they grow? So through polarization, through agglomeration, through spread effects. So please be very familiar of this one. It's important. Polarization is where economic activity concentrates in one place, often drawing people, capital, and resources, while agglomeration is the clustering of similar or complementary industries in one place. And spread effects is the diffusion of growth benefits to surrounding areas. So it's outward because it's spread effects. It's the opposite of polarization and agglomeration. But the difference between polarization and agglomeration is that agglomeration speaks of clustering, meaning a clustering of similar or complementary industries in one place, while polarization is more general, such that it says where economic activity concentrates in one place, and because people are drawn to it and capital are concentrated there, also resources. So I hope you will remember them. So we can tackle now the um hierarchy of the central places. Just a moment. Okay. Vaudeville's theory is also closely related to the concept of central places, of who theorized that. So it's Walter Christoller, where each urban center performs a set of functions for its surrounding area. And okay, there are some demonstrations, or how the hierarchy is determined. It's through the following. Number one, you can see the sub-bullet there, central place function. So hierarchy, the number it's about the number and type of functions, such as commercial, administrative. Okay, because these are the number and type of functions the place performs. And then also nodal location means that how it connects with other areas through transportation and communication flows. So these are the predominant flows, because it points out to where it should be organized. And that's why how central places are crafted, or are established. And these are the determinants. So development surface there, location on the development surface, level of development in different locations. So this is the level of development across the region. Then population growth rate, the last one is that it's the ability of the center to attract people, which is essential to its growth. So yeah, if you can imagine a growth center where people keep coming back and people are attracted to that place, because that's you know um the ability of the center, actually, to grow people, to be attracted to that place. Okay, so these are the four hierarchy of central places. And because um each urban center performs a set of functions for its surrounding area. And so these are the determinants. So we can go to the next slide. All right. Here, usefulness of growth pole and growth center. So it's a combination now of Peru and Vaudeville. So So the concept of growth poles and growth centers, as we've discussed, provides an efficient way to generate economic development and address regional disparities. So, number one, efficient way of generating development. So the growth pole and growth center is a good way, or it's an efficient way of generating development. So what do we mean by that? Because these theories highlight that development does not need to happen uniformly across all areas. Instead, by focusing on specific points or poles where industries and services cluster, we can harness agglomeration economies. The benefits for firms and industries get from being close to each other, right? So I hope you understand the concept of agglomeration economies, or simply agglomeration. Yes, and so these benefits include shared infrastructure, reduced transportation costs, and increased innovation through collaboration. So normally you can see them in an economic zone if that particular economic zone is homogeneous, meaning that it's they are grouped together, they're formed together because they have similar functions or they are interdependent of each other. So another one, usefulness of these two theories, reduction in public infrastructure. Because it says less public expenditures if investment areas are concentrated in specific growth points. So yeah, rather than spreading resources thinly across multiple regions. So it allows governments to maximize the impact of their investments. By focusing on certain urban centers or regions, public expenditures are optimized because infrastructure, services, and development initiatives are implemented in fewer areas but have more profound effects. And the third one, spread effects out of the growth point will help solve the problems of depressed regions. So one of the most powerful aspects of growth centers is the spread effect. As development occurs in growth poles, their economic benefits spill over into surrounding areas, helping to lift up more economically depressed regions. So this can result in job creation, improved infrastructure, and an increase in economic activities in areas that previously had little growth. The next one there is, it says transportation routes as channels of growth. Growth centers often rely on transportation networks to facilitate the movement of goods, people, and services. So these transportation routes, whether highways, railways, or ports, become vital channels that connect the growth center with its hinterlands, allowing the benefits of the center to reach broader regions and enabling efficient flow of resources. Then we have the next one is useful to understand regional structures and designate regional centers, predict changes or prescribe solutions to certain regional problems. Sounds vague. So by understanding the regional structure, planners can designate regional centers, predict changes in economic activity, and prescribe solutions to regional planners. How? So the application of growth pole theory allows planners to approach regional development with a focused strategic mindset, identifying key areas that can drive growth and acting as magnets for further development. Remember, magnets for further development. Now, the last the last one there in the usefulness is inspire the Philippine strategy of concentrated decentralization, where alternative urban centers serve as counter magnets to the primate city, which is the NCR, which has caused economic polarization, ang daming concepts, right? So, nahilo ba kayo doon? So, in the context of the Philippines, the growth center concept has inspired, that's what it means, the national strategy of concentrated decentralization. There are two concepts actually combined. Concentration, but this concentration is the centralized type of concentration. Or the decentralization is is a concentrated type. So this approach aims to develop alternative urban centers that can serve as counter magnets to the NCR. This one is trying to say that it's trying to avoid um polarization where the bulk of development is centered only in one place. In this particular example, it says it's centered in NCR while other regions lag behind. So by fostering new growth centers outside NCR, the strategy hopes to distribute economic activity more evenly across the country. So it was decentralized, but the manner is still concentration, and that's why it's called concentration decentralization along this concentrated decentralization as the one as a strategy in the Philippines. And this was they got inspiration from the Growth-Paul Growth Center theory of both yeah. Sino? Can you unmute? Sino yung ano? Sino yung dalawa? James? James? Yeah, who were the two theorists or thinkers that inspired or that established Growth Pole and Growth Center? Sino yung sa Growth Pole? Sino yung sa Growth Center? Roy? Roy? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes,
Who
pa.
who theorized Growth Pole and Growth Center?
Si Josue Peho.
Mm-hmm. Pehu, and then?
Josue Peho.
And then Growth Pole yun. And then who established Growth Center?
And Vaudeville.
Okay, very good. Naku, parang meron na rin ako ang isang top notcher. Di ba, no, Roy, no?
Hindi ko po alam.
Ano yun? So, dapat we should be ready, di ba? In no time, you are able to answer kaagad yung mga names, ano? But it's not just the name of the theory, but we need to understand, di ba, yung ating growth pole and growth center. So, probably, we can, okay, just a moment. Sana ako. Okay. I think we can, okay, no, because maybe yung mga green lang. So I just included those for some additional information for our viewers. Let's see. Yan. Gunnar Myrdal. It's getting ano no, it's getting so I will end with Gunnar Myrdal probably, or okay. Medyo ano no. Okay, si Gunnar Myrdal lang so that you can sleep well. Okay ba yan? Actually, it's not Gunnar, Gunnar Myrdal. So, yeah, the theory of cumulative causation, he's a Nobel laureate, is Gunnar Myrdal. He is one of the key regional planning. It's theory of cumulative causation is one of the key regional planning theories that explains how economic inequalities persist and widen due to market forces. And this theory is rooted in an understanding of how capitalism operates and its impact on regional development, with a particular emphasis on market-driven disparities. So, like, capitalism, he said, Capitalism is characterized by income and welfare inequalities based on history. So Myrdal begins with the observation that capitalism is inherently unequal. Income and welfare disparities are often rooted in history and tend to persist over time. This inequality is particularly stark when we look at different regions within a country, as not only all areas will develop at the same pace or level. Some regions will naturally attract more investment, talent, and resources, while others will lag behind. So he viewed um that in history, right? So capitalism and inequalities. Then he said also about market forces. So that's the one, this equilibrium. He also mentioned about this equilibrium here in economy. So I will read first. In countries divided into regions, growth will not be the same. This equilibrium in economy is due to market forces. Market forces create regional inequalities and widen those which already exist. Market forces, if left alone, tend to increase rather than decrease inequalities between regions. Again, market forces, if left alone, tend to increase rather than decrease inequalities between regions. So, according to Myrdal, market forces, what are these market forces? These are the forces of supply, demand, and price. According to him, they do not work in favor of reducing regional inequality. So if you come to think about it, he seemed to be um like a pessimist, right? But I never I never read about being I never read about Gunnar Myrdal as being pessimist. So we will continue that. In fact, it said they tend to worsen existing disparities. In a capitalist system, so that's his lens, capitalist system, regions that are already more prosperous will continue to grow, while poorer regions will struggle to catch up. So this is due to what Myrdal calls this inequilibrium or disequilibrium in the economy. Left to their own devices, market forces will continue to funnel resources into already successful regions, thereby widening the gap between developed and underdeveloped areas. So I hope you will remember this, okay? What he meant by those, okay? And then I will read the third one. Is according to Myrdal, regions with expanding economic activity will attract net migration from other parts of the country, thus favoring the growth regions. Capital investments tend to have a similar effect. Increased demand in centers of expansion spur investment, which in turn will increase incomes and demand and cause a second round of investments. Yeah, it sounds like complex, but it's not, because a crucial part of Myrdal's theory is the concept of net migration. When certain regions start expanding economically, they tend to attract migration from other less developed areas. This further accelerates the growth of already prosperous regions as they now have more workers, more consumers contributing to their economy. At the same time, the regions losing population are deprived of labor and talent, causing a further decline. So what is that concept about when you are continuing to lose talent? I will call someone. Vincent, do you know, do you remember about when
Oh,
you continue to lose talent? So
like I think it's brain drain, ma'am.
yes, that's brain drain. Very good. So that's brain drain principle, right? Correct? Can you explain more about brain drain?
Ano po?
Yeah. Can you explain more about brain drain, if you can demonstrate that?
It's like most of our talents are seeking greener pastures outside the region or outside the country,
Mm-hmm.
something like that, and they tend to utilize their talents abroad or for better pay,
Mm-hmm.
something, and they were treated with more compensations, something like that, ma'am.
Mm-hmm. So, what happens when there's brain drain happening
So
in a
if
particular
there's a
city?
continuous brain drain, I guess ganun na rin, may disequilibrium in the economy.
Okay. Yes. So you see, it's really good when you have stock knowledge, and it's also good that you are relating it also to the particular theory that we are trying to discuss here. So um similarly, capital investments, whether from private companies or the government, are often funneled into growing regions. So I'm not sure if you've noticed that, if this is also happening in your own region. I'm not sure in your own province. Like, because these regions offer better opportunities, right? So Vincent mentioned about they seek greener pastures, so they go to a place where they can get better pay. So because they offer better opportunities as a result. But we're talking now about capital investments, so that's also true to capital investments, that as a result, the demand for products and services in this regions rises, leading to further investments and a cycle of growth. So, mayaman na nga sila, mas mayaman pa. And this cycle leads to continuous rounds of reinvestments and further demand, exacerbating the inequality between regions. Okay? So, the key takeaway from Myrdal's theory is the idea of cumulative causation, where economic growth begets more growth and decline leads to further decline. Regions with expanding economic activity create self-reinforcing cycles of prosperity. So investments lead to more investments, demand leads to more demand, and the region continues to thrive. Conversely, regions without initial economic success struggle to break into these cycles of growth. So the last or highlights of the theory is the widening inequalities if left unchecked. In this particular theory, okay, we're not changing the, okay lang. If left alone, okay, market forces will naturally increase rather than decrease inequalities. So this is according to Myrdal. And this is why Myrdal argues that simply relying on market-driven development is not enough to ensure balanced regional growth. He suggests that government interventions are necessary to mitigate these disparities, redirecting resources and attention to underdeveloped regions. So, yeah, I hope you learned so much tonight. I can continue, but it's already almost 11, so that, circular, yeah, I think, meron pa tayong, about Gunnar Myrdal, so that, I will continue tomorrow for, sino na ba yan? I think, Richard spread. But meron pa kasing susunod na slide about Myrdal, about circular. This is very important, so I'll just do this quickly. Okay. So circular causation means that changes in one variable do not return the system to a balanced state. Instead, these changes trigger other changes that amplify the initial effect. For example, if a region starts growing economically, it tends to attract more resources, investments, and people, further accelerating its growth. This was exactly how what I mentioned earlier. So circular and cumulative causation also applies to underdeveloped regions. Once a region falls behind, it becomes harder to catch up because the lack of resources, investments, and opportunities pushes it farther into decline. So this creates a vicious cycle where the rich become richer and the poor become poorer. As Myrdal put it, okay, that's the one. He put that the poor become poorer and the rich become, because of this cumulative process where forces work in a circular manner to reinforce either development or underdevelopment. And he also mentioned Myrdal's theory also stresses that social systems are not self-equilibrating. This means that unlike natural systems, social and economic inequalities do not naturally balance out over time. In fact, they tend to become more pronounced unless something intervenes to stop the process. So he was referring to government intervention. So there are two important concepts Myrdal introduces here, the backwash and the spread. So backwash effect, this occurs when resources, capital, and attention are diverted back to the core or developed regions, further depriving underdeveloped areas. This leads to widening economic gaps between regions. Remember, that's what we call the backwash effect. The spread effects, while there are positive spillovers from growth, such as the initial benefits from access to raw materials or increased demand for products, these effects are usually weaker compared to the backwash. The core regions typically reabsorb the benefits, leaving peripheral regions with minimal gains. So Myrdal also points out that trade and market interactions often exhibit a fundamental bias in favor of already prosperous regions. Trade tends to flow toward regions with better infrastructure, more resources, and more established industries. This creates an uneven playing field where the more developed regions benefit disproportionately while the less developed regions struggle to compete. So Myrdal argues that government intervention is essential to counter the natural tendencies of capitalism that widen regional inequalities. Without government policies that actively promote regional development in lagging areas, the market forces of capitalism will continue to favor the rich regions. This is why state intervention is crucial in decreasing imbalances by directing investments, resources, and infrastructure development to underdeveloped regions. So Myrdal's theory explains why economic inequality is not just a temporary or natural state, but a self-reinforcing process. Please remember that it's a self-reinforcing process. Regions that succeed economically tend to continue succeeding, while those that fall behind are often stuck in cycles of underdevelopment. So government policies should aim to disrupt the circular and cumulative causation by making strategic interventions that uplift underdeveloped regions, reduce backwash effects, and strengthen spread effects. So I hope, yeah, this one I will end here because it's almost 11, and so we can do some photo documentation. Jen, if you don't mind, please open your camera. So I hope